Ankara, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has once again stepped into the center of the Middle East debate, delivering one of his most fiery speeches in recent years. In a high-stakes cabinet meeting that was later broadcast by state media, Erdogan directed his sharpest criticism yet at Israel and its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, accusing them of pursuing what he called a destabilizing and aggressive agenda in the region. The Turkish leader's words were not couched in the usual language of diplomatic protest. They came across as a direct challenge, a message to Israel, to the West, and to the broader international community that Ankara would no longer tolerate what it sees as the deliberate marginalization of the Palestinian cause. According to officials present, the meeting of Turkey's top ministers on Tuesday began with a routine review of domestic economic matters, but quickly turned to the spiraling conflict in Gaza and the mounting death toll among civilians. It was then that President Erdogan set aside prepared notes and launched into an unscripted and uncompromising address. Observers in the room say Erdogan's tone was urgent, at times angry, as he listed what he described as a pattern of Israeli policies aimed at perpetuating conflict in the Middle East rather than resolving it. President Erdogan said, "Israel has turned Gaza into a permanent pressure point, a tool to block Palestinian statehood and to expand its influence in the region." The remark drew murmurs among the ministers, many of whom were veterans of previous diplomatic clashes between Ankara and Tel Aviv. But Erdogan pressed on, accusing Israel of deliberately destabilizing the region. He added that Israel's current leadership had fueled chaos rather than pursuing peace, using every flare-up as an excuse to undermine the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. Diplomatic observers noted that what set this speech apart was the warning embedded in it. Erdogan was not merely criticizing, he was signaling that Turkey was prepared to respond in a more forceful manner if Israeli actions crossed what Ankara sees as red lines. Erdogan declared, "Turkey will not bow down to Israel's pressure. We will push back against aggression if it continues down this destructive path." Those words, broadcast by national television and quickly translated by international outlets, were widely interpreted as the clearest suggestion, yet that Ankara might consider escalatory measures, even the possibility, however remote, of direct confrontation. Several regional analysts noted that the line blurred the boundary between tough diplomatic rhetoric and an outright threat of conflict. That is why commentators across the Middle East describe the address as less a routine statement and more a veiled war warning directed personally at Prime Minister Netanyahu. Erdogan's remarks went far beyond bilateral grievances. In the same speech, he urged the international community to stop what he called the cycle of empty statements and to embrace concrete measures against Israel. Erdogan urged, "The world must move beyond words. It is time for sanctions on Israel, for suspending its membership in the United Nations, and for stronger recognition of Palestine." The president's call for punitive international steps came at a time when global opinion on the conflict has been shifting, with growing criticism of the humanitarian toll in Gaza. While many Western governments have stopped short of endorsing sanctions, several countries in the global south and within the Arab League have called for stronger diplomatic pressure. Erdogan's move appeared calculated to position Turkey at the forefront of this emerging bloc, the country willing to articulate demands others voice only in private. Ankara's confidence, Erdogan hinted, was bolstered by what he sees as a changing tide of international opinion. Over the past several months, a number of states, including some that traditionally avoided direct criticism of Israel, have voiced support for greater recognition of Palestinian rights. In his remarks, Erdogan pointedly referred to this development as proof that the Muslim world and a growing number of nations stand united in demanding justice for Palestine. He added that this growing chorus was giving Turkey extra confidence to speak out. Analysts say that Erdogan's rhetoric reflects a calculation, that Ankara can gain geopolitical clout not by waging war, but by acting as the loudest political voice on behalf of Palestinians, thus carving out a leadership role in the Muslim world without committing to military action. Despite the heated language, Erdogan has so far avoided concrete military measures. Turkey continues to maintain significant trade ties with Israel, and its defense planners remain cautious about the risks of any open confrontation. Several foreign policy experts believe Erdogan's goal is to put pressure on Israel and its Western allies without jeopardizing Turkey's own strategic and economic interests. A senior Turkish diplomat speaking on Background suggested that Ankara's aim is to increase the cost of what it sees as Israel's intransigence while keeping diplomatic channels open. The president wants the world to know that Turkey will not stay silent, the official said, but he also understands the need to avoid steps that could drag the country into direct conflict. The Turkish president's remarks mark a sharp escalation in a rivalry that has ebbed and flowed for decades. Relations between Ankara and Tel Aviv have been strained since the 2010 Mavi Marmara incident, in which a Turkish aid flotilla attempting to reach Gaza was intercepted by Israeli commandos, resulting in multiple deaths. Although ties improved somewhat in recent years, especially on trade and tourism, the latest war in Gaza has reopened old wounds. Erdogan, whose political brand has long included outspoken support for Palestinian statehood, has used the latest crisis to renew that stance in more forceful terms. He said, "We will not allow Israel to dictate the future of Palestine or to crush the will of its people." The time has come for the world to act, not merely to issue statements. Reactions to Erdogan's speech were swift. Israeli officials dismissed his comments as inflammatory and accused the Turkish president of exploiting the conflict for political gain. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Netanyahu's office said in a brief statement that Israel will not be lectured by those who support terrorism and incite violence against our people. In Washington, the US State Department called for restraint on all sides. A senior spokesperson noted that heated rhetoric helps no one and risks further escalation. Meanwhile, in several Arab capitals, Erdogan's remarks were welcomed as overdue. Palestinian representatives in Ramallah praised the speech as a voice of solidarity from a major regional power. At home, Erdogan's address resonated strongly with his political base, which has long viewed Palestinian solidarity as a moral and religious obligation. Crowds gathered in Istanbul's main squares the evening after the speech, waving Turkish and Palestinian flags and chanting slogans against Israeli policies. Yet critics within Turkey cautioned that the fiery words might be more about domestic politics than a shift in foreign policy. Opposition leaders argued that Erdogan's government has been reluctant to translate such rhetoric into tangible action, such as cutting trade ties or suspending existing security arrangements. One prominent opposition lawmaker told local media that the president speaks of defiance, but our ports remain open for Israeli goods and our diplomats continue to meet theirs. This is political theatre, not real policy. This tension between fiery language and restrained action lies at the heart of the current debate over Turkey's role in the Middle East conflict. Many analysts believe that Erdogan's speech was designed less to announce new policies than to stake out a moral and political position at a time when global attention is focused on Gaza. For Ankara, the calculation appears to be that projecting leadership in the Muslim world can be achieved through forceful words rather than risky military moves. As one Istanbul-based political analyst put it, Erdogan is challenging Israel's dominance in the narrative war. He's forcing the West to pay attention, but he is not eager to cross the line into actual conflict. In the end, the speech leaves the international community with a familiar question: can Turkey translate strong rhetoric into effective diplomatic or economic action, or will this remain another episode in what critics call Erdogan's political theatre? Even as Ankara ramps up its calls for sanctions and international measures, Turkish officials continue to emphasize dialogue. The foreign ministry announced that it would be consulting with allies and regional partners on potential initiatives, but did not outline any specific steps. President Erdogan's cabinet room speech has reignited debate over Turkey's foreign policy direction and its readiness to confront Israel in deeds rather than words. By framing the conflict in stark moral and geopolitical terms, Erdogan has once again placed himself at the center of a volatile regional crisis. Whether this moment marks the start of a new, more confrontational phase in Turkish-Israeli relations, or whether it remains largely a rhetorical show of defiance, will depend on how Ankara chooses to act in the coming weeks, and on how Israel responds to the warning that Turkey will not bow down.